Hey there, horror hounds. Grab your favorite spooky snack and get cozy. It's time for another spine-tingling session of the Fear Club. Tonight's menu? 2 terrifying tales that will make you second-guess ever pitching a tent again. Let's dive into the campfire whispers and the morning pines. Dare to listen?
The campfire whispers. The forest around Silver Pine Campground was dense, its towering trees forming a dark canopy that blocked out the moonlight. A group of friends, Emily, Jake, Sarah, and Tom, had decided to spend the weekend camping, seeking a break from their stressful city lives. They arrived late in the afternoon, set up their tents near a secluded clearing, and gathered around the campfire as night fell. As they sat around the flickering flames, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, an old man appeared from the shadows. His sudden presence startled them. He was thin, with weathered skin and a wild, unkempt beard. His eyes, though tired, held a strange intensity. "Mind if I join you?" he asked in a raspy voice. Unsure of how to respond but not wanting to be rude, they nodded, making room for him by the fire. The man settled in, warming his hands. "You kids ever hear the story of Silver Pine?" he began. "This place wasn't always a campground. It used to be a settlement, long ago. But it's been forgotten, and for good reason." Intrigued, Emily leaned forward. "What happened here?" The old man's gaze fixed on the fire as he continued. "The settlers vanished one by one. Some say they were taken by the forest itself, others that they were cursed. At night, whispers would fill the air, voices calling from the darkness, leading people into the woods, never to return." Jake, always the skeptic, smirked. "You're just trying to scare us." The old man's expression didn't change. "Those who hear the whispers are marked. Once you hear them, they follow you, no matter where you go." As if on cue, the wind picked up, causing the fire to sputter. The trees rustled, and a faint whisper seemed to drift through the air. Sarah shivered and glanced around nervously. "Maybe we should call it a night," she suggested, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over them. The old man stood up abruptly. "You're already marked," he said, his voice low and ominous. "Remember, don't follow the voices. No matter what they say." Without another word, he disappeared into the woods as suddenly as he had appeared. The friends exchanged uneasy glances but tried to laugh it off. They put out the fire and retreated to their tents. However, sleep didn't come easily. The old man's story lingered in their minds, and every rustle outside made their hearts race. Around midnight, Emily awoke to the sound of soft whispers outside her tent. At first, she thought it was Jake or Tom playing a prank, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She couldn't make out the words, but they seemed to be calling her name. Ignoring the old man's warning, she unzipped her tent and peered outside. The forest was pitch black, but she could see faint, glowing lights deep among the trees. The whispers were louder now, urging her to follow. Compelled by a strange force, Emily stepped out of her tent and began walking toward the lights. She didn't notice that the others had also emerged from their tents, drawn by the same eerie whispers. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around them, and the lights became more distant, always just out of reach. The whispers were all around them now, echoing in their minds, growing more frantic. Suddenly, the lights vanished, leaving them in complete darkness. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. The whispers, once luring, turned menacing, filled with anger and malice. The friends tried to find their way back, but the forest was a maze, every direction leading them further into the unknown. By dawn, only silence remained in the clearing where they had camped. Their tents stood abandoned, their belongings scattered. The campers had vanished without a trace, just like the settlers before them. The old man returned to the campsite later that morning, his face grim as he surveyed the empty tents. He muttered a prayer under his breath and left, knowing the forest had claimed more souls. To this day, campers at Silver Pine Campground sometimes hear soft whispers in the night, calling them into the woods. Those who heed the call are never seen again, leaving behind only the faint echo of their laughter around the campfire. The Mourning Pines. Nestled deep within the dense, ancient woods of Ravens Hollow, Pine Grove Campground was a place of eerie beauty. The towering pine trees, with their twisted, gnarled branches, stood like silent sentinels, their needles carpeting the ground in a soft, thick layer. The air was always cool, tinged with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves, and the light that filtered through the canopy was dim and green, casting the forest in perpetual twilight. Pine Grove had a dark reputation. The locals whispered of strange happenings, of campers who had vanished without a trace, and of a lingering sadness that hung over the place like a shroud. It was said that the campground was cursed, haunted by the restless spirits of those who had met untimely ends within the forest's shadowy depths. But for a group of thrill-seeking friends, Matt, Sarah, Greg, and Abby, these stories were just another reason to visit. They were no strangers to haunted places, having explored abandoned asylums, forgotten graveyards, and derelict houses in their quest for a good scare. When they heard about Pine Grove, they couldn't resist the challenge. What better way to spend a weekend than camping in a haunted forest, where the line between the living and the dead was said to be at its thinnest? They arrived late in the afternoon, the sky overcast and the forest eerily quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under their tires and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As they unloaded their gear, the oppressive silence seemed to close in around them, the towering pines blocking out the sun and muffling all noise. "This place is creepy as hell," Abby remarked, her voice barely above a whisper as she looked around. "That's the point, isn't it?" Matt grinned, though even he couldn't hide the unease creeping into his mind. They chose a spot near the edge of the campground, close to a small clearing where the trees parted just enough to reveal a patch of gray sky. The old fire pit was still intact, its stones blackened from countless fires that had long since burned out. They set up their tents, built a fire, and settled in for the night, eager to see if the stories about Pine Grove were true. As night fell, the forest seemed to come alive. The wind howled through the trees, making the branches sway and creak like old bones. The fire flickered and danced, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to reach out toward them. But it wasn't the wind or the shadows that unsettled them, it was the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from the trees themselves, a chorus of voices speaking in a language none of them could understand. The words were garbled, fragmented, but the tone was unmistakable, sorrow, anger, and desperation, woven together in a haunting symphony. "Do you guys hear that?" Greg asked, his voice trembling as he looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the whispers. Sarah nodded, her face pale in the firelight. "Yeah, it's like the forest is talking." "Or something in it," Abby added, her eyes wide with fear. Matt, ever the skeptic, tried to brush it off. "It's just the wind messing with us. We're in a creepy forest, so of course our minds are going to play tricks." But even he couldn't deny the growing sense of dread that wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket. The whispers were relentless, and no matter how hard they tried to ignore them, they couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching them, lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. As midnight approached, the whispers reached a fever pitch, becoming almost deafening. The air grew thick with a cold, unnatural chill, and the fire began to sputter, as if struggling to stay alive. Then, without warning, the flames were snuffed out, plunging the campground into darkness. Panic set in as they fumbled for their flashlights, their breath coming in ragged gasps. But the light did little to dispel the shadows that now seemed to close in around them, thick and impenetrable. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Matt replied, his bravado completely gone. "We need to get out of here." But as they prepared to flee, something stopped them in their tracks, a figure, standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness. It was a woman, her long hair hanging in tangled strands over her face, her clothes tattered and soaked through as if she had just crawled out of a grave. She stood motionless, her head tilted slightly to the side, as if listening to the whispers. "Who are you?" Abby called out, her voice wavering. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she slowly lifted her head, revealing eyes that were dark, empty voids, devoid of any life. Her lips parted, and she began to speak in a low, guttural voice, the words garbled and twisted, like the whispers that had plagued them all night. "Leave this place, or join us, forever." The air grew colder still, and the whispers intensified, swirling around them like a cyclone of voices, each one crying out in anguish. The woman took a step forward, and with each step, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if the earth itself was reacting to her presence. "Run!" Greg shouted, and they bolted for the path that led back to their car, the woman's voice following them, growing louder with each step. But the forest seemed to conspire against them. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the woods instead of out. The trees closed in around them, their branches clawing at their clothes, slowing their progress. And always, the whispers pursued them, filling their ears, their minds, until it was all they could hear. Finally, they burst into another clearing, breathless and terrified, only to find themselves back where they started, their campsite. But something was different now. The tents were gone, the fire pit cold and undisturbed, as if they had never been there at all. And in the center of the clearing, the woman stood waiting, her empty eyes fixed on them, a twisted smile playing on her lips. "You can't leave," she whispered, her voice echoing through the trees. "You're part of the forest now." As the words sank in, the ground beneath them began to shift, the earth splitting open to reveal dark, gaping chasms. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, and the trees seemed to reach out for them, their branches twisting and elongating into skeletal hands. One by one, they were pulled into the earth, their screams swallowed by the forest, their bodies consumed by the dark, hungry soil. The last thing they heard before the darkness took them was the woman's voice, soft and cold, bidding them welcome to the morning pines, where the dead never rest, and the living are doomed to join their eternal lament. The next morning, Pine Grove Campground was as it always had been, silent, empty, and bathed in the soft light of dawn. But if you listen closely, you might hear the faintest of whispers carried on the wind, the mournful cries of those who had been lost to the forest, forever bound to the cursed land.
Thank you for joining us on this frightful journey. If you enjoyed these stories, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends who love a good scare. And don't forget to subscribe to the Fear Club for more horror. See you next time.